Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday, so it's Halacha and Tanya. Last time we were learning the dinam of, not doing anything that people might suspect that you're doing something wrong. Then we started, the next din is what's called rechilus. Rechilus is gossip. That means it's not bad, it's true, but nevertheless, it's gossip. There's a very interesting from Rabbeinu Gershom. He made a lot of takonis. That you can't marry two wives, you can't divorce a woman against her will. One of the takonis of Rabbeinu Gershom was that you're not allowed to read somebody else's mail. In other words, if it's a sealed letter, you're not allowed to open it up and read it, or it's you shouldn't just look at somebody else's papers. Unless if the guy threw them out, then he doesn't care. So obviously, if you take it out of the garbage, you can read it. But like according to this, it's all part of the chilus issue. So if somebody has papers on his desk, let's say, and you walk into his office, you're not allowed to read those papers without permission. Because that's what he said, because it's a guy, what are you reading? Something that's not yours. I mean, it has nothing to do with you, so why are you reading it? So that's all part of this rechilus bit. And then we started saying there's even something worse than rechilus, and that is the concept what's called Lashon Hara. Now, Lashon Hara is you speak bad about somebody, even though it's true. It's true. You're not lying. You're saying the truth about somebody, but basically you're saying terrible things about somebody. In fact, there's something worse, and we'll get that's called Meitzi Shemra. Meitzi Shemra means when you make up stories about somebody that are bad and they're not even true. And that's even worse. Lashon Hara at least is true. It's bad enough as it is. But you should know the Gemara says that Lashon Hara, speaking bad about somebody, is equal to idolatry, adultery, and murder. That's how severe speaking Lashon Hara is. So everybody knows the Chafetz Chaim wrote a whole sefer, a lot of details of Lashon Hara. But there's certain times, in other words, like this. If three people know about it already, then it's not really Lashon Hara unless if you're telling it to misspread it even more. So if people don't know about it and you're telling them, that's real bad Lashon Hara, because then you're actually spreading it to begin with. But even if three people know about it, the Gemara says Lashon Hara doesn't apply, it means if your intention is not to publicize it more. But again, even then, there's still the concept of Lashon Hara, which is forbidden. Now, there comes times, in fact, we learned this in the past. The Gemara says in Erchin, that Lashon, we learned this not long ago in one of these classes, Lashon Hara kills three people. It kills the talker, the listener, and the one they're talking about. So we learned that Rabbeinu Yena asks, the talker, I understand, he's talking. The listener, I understand, no listener, there's no talker. But why never, the poor guy they're talking about Lashon Hara, why in the world is that hurting him? And the answer is because every person has evil. When you speak about somebody's bad, you're actually revealing that bad that might be dormanted and hidden within the person. And now it's coming out into the open. So it's hurting the person you're talking about because that evil that they had that you are speaking about now is now becoming revealed within the person that can have a very negative impact on the person. Not only that, it says even to think Lashon Hara, think bad about somebody is also not good. Because we know thought is worse than speech, because thought is closer to the soul than speech is. Because we know you can stop talking sometimes, you cannot talk, but you can never stop thinking. And the Chassidus explains why can a person never stop thinking? Because when a person, the nefesh, thought is called in Chassidus the expression levush hamiyuchad. It's one with the person himself. And it's so one with the person, just like you're constantly, the neshama is constantly working, you're constantly thinking. So therefore, thought, a bad thought, is a bigger blemish on the neshama because it's a closer level to the soul than speech. So it's a worse level. It's closer to the neshama, so it's a bigger blemish on the neshama than it is even when you speak. Okay, so therefore, that's what it says in halacha. But sometimes, okay, let me just say what it says here. Okay, now what is Lashon Hara? Okay, they give some examples of Lashon Hara. Somebody says to his friend, where can I get fire? Okay, so a guy answers in a derogatory way, go to this in this guy's house. He has a lot of meat and fish, and he's always cooking, but it's said in a derogatory way. Or there's something called avak Lashon Hara. Avak Lashon Hara means the dust of Lashon Hara. It's not real Lashon Hara, but I'll give you examples that the Shulchan Aruch says. Somebody comes to you and they say, oh, you know about this and this guy? So they want to say good, whatever it is. And you say, do me a favor. Don't talk to me about that guy. So you didn't say anything bad. But the implication was pretty severe that you don't want to have anything to do with that guy. So if you say, I don't want to hear anything about him. Or another example, what's called the dust of Lashon Hara. If you speak good about somebody in the presence of their enemy. So even though you're speaking good, but what happens when you speak good in front of your enemy? You know what's going to happen? The enemy is going to say, yeah, and you know what the guy does. So the good that you're saying is causing that the person should speak Lashon Hara about it. So granted, you're not speaking Lashon Hara, but it's still called Avak Lashon Hara, the dust, because you're causing somebody to speak Lashon Hara. Or like Shlomo Melech says, in a way of swiggling. In other words, you make it sound as if it's not Lashon Hara, and you give the impression it's not Lashon Hara, but you yourself know it is Lashon Hara. And therefore, there the pasuk says, you should fear God, because God Hashem knows exactly what you're talking about. But I want to discuss an issue which comes up very often, by the way, and every single case, you must ask a shaila because every case is different. Let's say, a guy is a thief. Or a guy that whenever he borrows money from people, he never pays back. He just doesn't. And somebody comes to you and says, this guy asked me for a loan, should I lend him the money? So if you say yes, you're going to cause this guy a damage. He's going to lend him the money and he's not going to get paid back. If you tell him, no, don't lend him the money because he doesn't pay back, is that Lashon Hara? So again, every case should be discussed with the Rav because there's a lot of details in each case. But Poskim Rai, I'm giving a general statement. If you're going to be saving somebody damage by speaking Lashon Hara, then it's not Lashon Hara. Because you're not speaking bad against the person. You want to save the person that he shouldn't lose money by lending money to a guy that never pays back. Or sometimes, and this is even more delicate, when it comes to shidduchim, okay? You get a call, somebody is asking me a question about shidduch for somebody, and I know certain things about them. Now, if I don't say them, the guy might get engaged to them and suffer because of it. But if I do say it, then it might be Lashon Hara. So again, I'm just saying, in those cases, it's not necessarily called Lashon Hara according to halacha, because you're not doing it to speak bad about somebody. You're doing it to save somebody else from harm. And that is not part of Lashon Hara. But again, every case really should be discussed, because every case is different. And there's a whole discussion in contemporary halacha. What is allowed to be said when it comes to shidduchim? What are you allowed to say? What are you not allowed to say? And there's very complicated shilas. Because let's take an extremist. Let's say a person is a molester or an abuser, and they ask you about him, yeah, then you have an obligation to say it. Because otherwise, they might get married to the person, whatever, and they might get a molested or abused. But again, every case has to be decided by a rab. If a guy is, I'm throwing out cases. A man is a womanizer, okay? And he's all over the place. And somebody asks you about a shidduch for this guy. And you know that even if he gets married, he's still going to be a womanizer. So again, I'm just getting cases that it would be permitted halachically sometimes to say something negative about the person, because again, it's the two issues. It's Lashon Hara from one side, but from the other side, you're actually protecting the person that's asking you the question. So again, all these things need to be dealt with. Another din, by the way, which is part of Lashon Hara, so to speak, you're not allowed to. Let's say you were a guest in somebody's house, and they were a fabulous host, and people ask you about them, and you're going to tell them they're such a great host. You know what's going to happen? Everybody's going to want to stay in their house. In fact, that's one of the three things the Gemara in Bava Metzia says that Talmid Chacham is allowed to lie. There's three things that it says in halacha. If a Talmid Chacham only lies in these three things, so then you could trust him in anything, because he only lies. But one of the three things that the Gemara says you're allowed to lie is about achsanya, which means if somebody took care of you very well, and the problem is if you tell people that, they're all going to run to him and they'll eat up everything that he has. Don't forget, in those days it wasn't like today. Things were different. So then it's not good. Another interesting din, and people are not aware of this, so they just don't keep it. If somebody says to somebody says something to somebody, you're not allowed to repeat it unless if he says, yeah, repeat it. So then now to Rabbi Shulchan, if you say something to your chava, your Baal Tema, meaning you really are not allowed to say it to somebody else unless he gives you permission. Unless if it's something that everybody knows anyway. But I'm telling you, if somebody is telling you something, so to speak, that's not public knowledge, you're really not allowed to repeat it unless if the person gives you permission to repeat it. Because again, it's all part of this talking things that spread gossip in Lashon Hara and all those types of things. So you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Now, another thing, if you speak Lashon Hara in front of somebody, not in front of somebody, or you're going to cause that if it does get people do find out about it, it's going to hurt or damage your friend in a way that it'll be afraid or whatever, then you shouldn't do it. Okay? So he says, what is the Eitzah? Kitzur Shchonar says, what's the advice of not speaking Lashon Hara? So he says, if you're a Talmid Chacham, just go learn Torah. Learn Torah. You won't be able to speak Lashon Hara. If you're an illiterate that can't, so you should become humble and think, why am I better than anybody else? That I could speak bad about somebody else when I probably have more faults than that person does. So generally speaking, they tell a famous story. Not God forbid that Chassidim speak Lashon Hara, but the Chafetz Chaim was very close with the Rebbe Rashab, whose birthday was this Chav Cheshvan. And he once asked them, they met a lot, the Chaim Brisker, the Chafetz Chaim, the Rabbi Rashab, the Chaim Ezer. These were the leaders of world Jewry in Europe in those days. And they met very often at meetings, and they're very, very close. So the Chafetz Chaim, who by the way wrote the Mishnah Berurah, said to the Rabbi Rashab, I don't understand something. He said, Chassidim are crazy, crazy careful not to touch their beard. Even though it might be not biblical, and it might only be rabbinic, and they won't even cut it, and they won't trim it, and how come they're so crazy? Which is maybe not even biblically forbidden, and maybe if it's only a few sins, whatever. And yet Lashon Hara, they're not so careful, and Lashon Hara could be, I think, 15 negative commandments, 16 negative commandments. He said to him, he asked the Rabbi Rashab, why are the Chassidim so fanatically careful about a beard, not to cut the beard, and Lashon Hara, they're not so particular. The Rabbi Rashab explained to him as follows. You're right. Lashon Hara is a very bad sin. But he said like this, when you want to, at least in those days, you want to go take a shave. Yeah. So he said, what do? You go to the barber shop. You sit down in the chair, and they put this shmata around you, and there's a whole, he said, it's a premeditated crime. He said, Lashon Hara, nobody says, okay, let's sit down and talk Lashon Hara. I mean, normal people don't do that. Nobody says, okay, let's just talk Lashon Hara. It talks, it comes up by itself. So one's premeditated, and one, so to speak, is on the spot. So therefore, he said, in that respect, the beard is worse than but whatever it is, nevertheless, a person is not allowed to talk Lashon Hara. And in fact, the Gemara has a very sharp expression. The Gemara says that 4 types of people never merit to greet the Shechina. They're not Mekabel Pnei HaShechina. Who are they? Leitzim, people that do mockery. Chanafim, flatterers, people that flatter other people, flattery. Liars, and people that speak Lashon Hara. And the Gemara, the Gemara quotes it, the Kitzur Shechina brings down all the psukim. They bring down a pasuk, clearly that in the Tanakh, it says that these 4 people don't merit to see the Shechina. So you have people just do lates on him, like David Amach, the first pasuk of Tim says, we shouldn't sit in a group of scoffers and mockers because it's emptiness. They're empty people, so they don't merit to see the Shechina. Next one is Chanafim, flatterers. They lie about somebody, and and it's not true, and they're lying. And then you have people that mamish lie, and the last group is people that speak Lashon Hara. I'll never forget, there was a very popular senator in New York called Howard Jarvis, and he was running for re-election. No, Javits, his name was Javits. And he came to the Rebbe. All the politicians, when they run for election, they go around to all the Rebbes and all the Rosh Yeshivas to get the community votes. So he's sitting in Yechidus. So there's a tape of it. I heard the tape. There's a tape, and he's flattering the Rebbe. Okay, a politician is flattering the Rebbe. So the Rebbe stopped, smiled, and he said to him, "Don't flatter me. I'm not running for office. Don't flatter me. I'm not a politician that you need to flatter." Jacob Javis, correct. Thank you. Jacob Javis, he went to Yechidus and he was flattering the Rebbe smiled and he said, "Do me a favor, don't flatter me. I'm not running for office." Because flattery, that's what it's all about. Okay. Next is a very important din that's called Nekama and Netira. The Torah in one pasuk says, "Leisikaim v'leisitor." What the Gemara says, what's the difference between Nekama means revenge, and Sitar is a type of revenge. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? The Gemara says like this. The Gemara gives an example as follows. I come to you and ask you, lend me your axe. You say, no, I don't want to lend it to you. The next day you come to me and ask me to lend you my axe. So he say to you, no, you didn't lend it to me. Why should I lend you mine? That's called nekama. That's called revenge, which is biblically forbidden. You didn't invite me to your wedding. I'm not inviting you to my wedding. Okay, that's revenge. If that's the reason why you're doing it, that's called nekama. What is netira? Netira, the Gemara says like this. I ask you, lend me your axe. You say no. Tomorrow you come to me and ask me to lend you that axe. And I say to you, yes, I'm going to give you the axe because I'm not like you who didn't give it to me. It's not revenge because I'm giving it to you, but it's wording of revenge. And you're saying, I'm not like you who didn't give it to me, and I'm going to give it to you. So both of those things are biblically forbidden, nekama and netira. What are you supposed to do? If a guy doesn't lend you the axe, and the next day he comes to you and asks you to lend him the axe, you say, please, of course, no problem, without any side comments. You give it to him and you say, fine, no problem. So you're not taking revenge and you're not doing netira. Okay? So you should give him with not only the halacha says, and this again between the person and Hashem, you should give him with a clean, complete heart, a pure heart, because a person should always what's called mavid al midaisav. Mavid al midaisav means to forgive and forget. Okay? Somebody does something bad to you. Okay, Hashem wanted it to happen. Forgive it. Move on. Don't hold grudges. Don't take revenge. Don't do netira. Just move on. Okay? Like it says. And says, how is it? Then Shulchan Aruch says, what's kosher revenge? You're not allowed to take revenge, but how do you, so this is all from the Rambam. If you want to take revenge, you know what you should do? Become a better person, go in a more straight path. And that's automatically you're going to revenge because that person is going to be upset that you became even a better person. But that's kosher revenge. In other words, I'm not doing something not to you. I'm not telling you anything about it. I'm just becoming a better person. And if you become a better person, the other person feels bad about it. And that's the best way you can, when he hears your good name. But if you're going to be speaking, lowering yourself to their level, so then not only you didn't become greater, you lowered yourself to that level. You know, I mean, there's a lot of stories. In fact, I heard this not from my father. He never told me the story. There was once, my father was the rabbi of a big shul in Chicago, and somebody was speaking very disgusting to him. And my father answered him back very nicely, calmly. So his assistant rabbi said to him, Rabbi Shusterman, how did you, he says, you expect me to stoop to his lowness and his crassness? Why should I stoop to that level? Just because he's not nice doesn't give me permission to be not nice. And that's what Torah says, by the way. Torah says, just because somebody did something bad to you doesn't mean you have the right to do back to them. And not only that, all you're doing by it is lowering yourself and you're going to lose respect. Not taking revenge, not doing the netira is actually the way a person gets more respect from people and definitely from Hashem. And like we learned the other day, you have to be good in the eyes of man and the eyes of Hashem. So that's these dinim are basically what we learned. Is Lashon Hara is speaking bad. Ubechila is first just gossip. Lashon Hara is when you speak bad, but it's true. Motzi Shemra is when you speak bad about a person, it's not true. And then you have Avak Lashon Hara, all these types of things. Basically, these are all the ways of midos. good midas that a person should learn to conduct themselves. Okay. Next din also in Kitzur is similar to these dinim, and it's that all the intent that a person should do, everything they should do it l'shem shemayim. They should do it for the sake of heaven. In other words, let me give an introduction to this based on a mimer of the previous Rebbe. There are many types of temptations. Okay, he goes into, I believe, 4 gradations of starting from the lowest. The people have a temptation of eating and drinking. Okay, he said those temptations are very animalistic. They're like an animal. Animals also eat and drink. Okay, so to say that, your whole life is, as the expression goes, Jews are supposed to eat to live. Some people live to eat. So that is one type of pleasure. He says a more refined pleasure than that, a higher level of pleasure, he says, is pleasure from music. People enjoy music. It's an enjoyment of music. Enjoyment of music, it's self-understood, is a much more refined pleasure than eating and drinking. Above that, he says, is kind people that are nice people by nature, love to do favors to people, and they get enjoyment from it. They just enjoy doing favors to people. He said, so the Friedrich Rebbe writes in a Maimer, that's also a more refined, because now you're helping somebody else. It's not music that you're enjoying for yourself. You have a pleasure of doing somebody a favor, which is actually a much more refined pleasure. I enjoy helping somebody else. Okay? A higher level than that is intellectual pleasure. Intellectual pleasure means there are people that just enjoy learning, whether it's secular knowledge or whatever it is. There are human beings that just enjoy learning, and that's their pleasure. Okay? If you notice, the brilliant scientists and the brilliant inventors were not people, generally speaking, that lived the life of, a lot of eating. They lived the life of deprivation because they didn't feel deprivation. By them, it wasn't important. Their enjoyment in life was from intellectual things, which is even higher than emotional things. And then he explains the highest level of enjoyment, of tainug, of pleasure, is when a person enjoys a connection with Hashem. That is the ultimate level of connection, that the pleasure that a person, the most refined pleasure, is a pleasure of a person becoming connected to Hashem. And that's what it says in the Gemara. Says there's a very short, even a pasuk in Mishnah, it's not even a Chumash. B'chol derachecha da'ehu, in all your ways know Hashem. And it's later already, you have to go to Tanya, but in Mitzvah Hashem next week we'll discuss what that means. B'chol derachecha da'ehu, in your ways, you should actually know Hashem. Okay, let's go to Tanya.